Fresh Economic Thinking podcast, new ideas and analysis with Dr. Cameron Murray and Jonathan Gadir. G'day, Cameron. Good to chat with you again.
G'day, Jonathan. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well. I saw that you posted a whole bunch of stuff about karma. Could you explain a bit about what have you become a Buddhist?
Look, I think it's just, it's an interesting sales angle on the idea, essentially, that humans create networks of people who end up having like a hidden accounting system of who owes who from previous favors. Who should I look after in the future? And the karma element is sort of the positive spin, but the thinking on it comes from understanding political favoritism and building up those IOUs amongst your political allies. But I think it works both ways. And so, yeah, I posted this week on Substack. It's called The Economics of Favors and Karma. And it basically says, if you're out there in the world doing favors for people, they will feel obligated to you in the future. And so either directly or indirectly, when you do good things for others, you'll get paid back and those favors will be reciprocated. So that's sort of my economic angle on being a good person.
And I guess what I understand that you're advancing this argument because you're trying to sort of answer a question that people have about, well, it's related to corruption, essentially. People who might think we don't have corruption because there's bribes are not really part of our setup here in Australia. And I think you're making the point that it doesn't really work that way. The corruption doesn't need bribes to function.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, the bribe is almost saying, I don't want to participate in a long run game or favor. So yeah, so you're right that this is one of the motivations for saying this, but one of the others sort of puzzles that is related is that if you ask someone for a favor, they're more likely to give you another favor in the future. That's one of those little quirks that you hear about. If you've ever watched a film where they say, go undercover and get to know this guy at the pub, because you're an undercover agent, you want to ask someone for a favor first, because when they do the favor to you, when you do the favor for them, they feel like they owe you and that they can trust you. Whereas if you do the opposite, they might feel like they're being exploited. So that's also one reason why people might be reluctant to accept gifts or favors, because of the expectation of reciprocating in the future. And so you're right that when it comes to politics, this is how the game is played, because if you're not paying for a political decision, what you're doing is you're getting it on credit. So you're giving a favor today and you've got these hidden accounts of who owes who what favors in the future. And so I just wanted to explicitly show that actually this can also be a very good thing when you're out in the world in your personal networks, giving out favors, that they will come back to you.
And let's talk a bit about your specific example, which is about political donations, donors to political parties. And we know that financial donations to political parties in Australia, they're often companies that donate to both parties or to both major parties, and maybe even to others. Tell us your take on this.
The big puzzle is why are political donations so small? Because if you're buying a favor and that political decision is worth millions to you, and you're getting that from a $10,000 or $20,000 donation, that doesn't seem like the right price for a purchase of the decision. However, if you are doing the political donation as a favor, but you want to know that that person's credit is good and that they'll reciprocate in the future, you'd like to see them do some costly signaling. That is, do something that's expensive to them to prove to you that their credit's good in the future if you favor them. And so that's how I see donations, as a costly signaling in this game of favor exchange to say that, hey, if you look after me with a favor, my credit's good and I'll reciprocate it in the future. So that's how I resolve this puzzle, and why donations still work, even if you donate to both sides of politics. Because if it's a bribe, you know, that payment has to be a benefit to you. But if you're also paying the political competition, where's the benefit from my bribe? You know, you're not making it any easier for me to win government, or, out advertise the competition. So your donations isn't really helping me. So why would I want it? Well, I want it because it's a costly signal to you, costly signal from you, that if I look after you, your credit's good. So that's how it all fits together, in my understanding, and I think it resolves a lot of puzzles.
So you mean if I don't know, a big mining company donates to both major sides of politics, the signal is that we're players, and in the future, if you do the right thing by us, we're good to sort of reciprocate, or in whatever way that is, whether it's, I don't know, giving retired politicians a nice job, or I don't know. Is that
Yeah,
essentially?
that's exactly right, and that's obviously one of the classic ways to repay. Um, from think about it from a personal level, you can get, 20,000 or 40,000 to your political party today as a donation, but you might get 500,000 a year for 4 or 5 years when you're retired, to your personal account. That's where the real repayment of the favor is. The donation's just a signal, um, about the credit worthiness, yeah, for this long run game. So that's how I think it pieces together.
So have any Barneys around that, or has it been well received so far?
Yeah, so far well received, and I think most people intrinsically understand this, because most people operate like this in their daily lives. When someone helps look after your kids, you feel like you should help them out in the future, and that's sort of a built-in human tendency. And once we, get away from these more robotic economic assumptions of human behavior, and understand that humans have this desire to reciprocate, it's biological, then I think we can really understand these processes more, both on the benefit, in terms of karma and doing good things for others and getting good things in the future, and in terms of, political games, and what might seem like good things to political insiders.
Bit of a change of pace. I wanted to talk to you about something that's a little bit beyond your standard topic, your standard areas of research. It relates to how people make choices. So let me introduce it this way. In Victoria, there's an election coming up on the 26th of November. In New South Wales, where I live, there's an election coming up on the 25th of March next year. And it's gotten me thinking about the incredibly stifling and sort of ossified nature of our democratic system, and how unfinished is this journey of democracy that we have. So, because we sort of take it for granted that we just have to aggregate all our thoughts on different issues and pick a candidate and pick a party, and just live with the fact that we might agree with 30% or 40% or 50% of what they say, and disagree with the other percentage of what they say and what they stand for, and just live with that, and basically live with an elected dictatorship for 3 or 4 years. Unless you obviously take into account the pressure you can put on politicians from outside the parliament, through protests and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
for me personally, this election coming up in New South Wales is sort of more tricky than usual, because we've just been through, I know a lot of people want to forget about it, and I certainly want to forget about it too, but I can't, because it was so traumatic. We've been through this time last year. We were in the middle of an incredibly authoritarian lockdown, and I was very grateful that the New South Wales government took a slightly different approach, not a hugely different approach, but different enough that allowed me, for example, to take a walk outside by myself at 10 p.m., which is something I really, really value. In fact, every fiber of my being rebelled at what was going on in Victoria, in terms of nighttime curfew, for example. And I said to myself at the time that if that ever came into effect here, I would be prepared to go to jail for my right to walk around by myself at 10 p.m. It was I felt it was so unjust and such an infringement of basic liberties that I was really grateful that even though it was a harsh and, authoritarian lockdown, there was a little bit more, value placed on basic liberties here in New South Wales compared to Victoria. Now, having said that, and I was very grateful that I didn't have a Dan Andrews style government ruling over me at that time, I don't like much else about this New South Wales government. They've privatised my buses. They've cut my bus services. They've failed to hire nurses and invest in the health system, which has affected me as well. So here we go. The dilemma of when you want to make issue-based choices and you're not allowed to by our system. So this is something I've been aware of for a long time, and I was involved a little bit a few years ago with a group called Flux. Now, I think you've heard of Flux. You know some of the people involved.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and they advance a very nice little experiment. They advance some very interesting ideas on how you can do issue-based direct democracy. We've got the technology now. It doesn't fit that great with our system of representative parliamentary democracy, but they did a pretty good job of coming up with a system that might work, I think. Unfortunately, they've been deregistered by what it seems like is a fairly unfair decision by the Electoral Commission. But anyway, that's for people to discover for themselves. They still have a website, voteflux.org. Now, are you in a position to explain how it works and your view on it, or do you want me to explain first how it works
Look,
and then?
Maybe best if you explain how it works, because it has been some years, but at a high level, my understanding is Flux is not about voting for a candidate, but getting a candidate who will be loyal to a system of having their members vote on a issue by issue basis, and then that candidate who gets elected would then represent the members directly on each issue. Is that a good high level, or is there more to it?
And the key thing is everyone thinks, oh, I don't know about all the issues. Like there's so many pieces of legislation coming up every week in Parliament. How the hell would I know what way to vote on this or that? The interesting thing about this system is you can swap away your vote on issues you don't care about or don't know about for a credit that you can use on issues that you do care about. And so they've got an app or software that makes that possible.
Yeah, so I think one of the ideas, there's quite a lot of ideas around direct voting in that way in economics. One's called quadratic voting, where you can have sort of purchase extra votes for certain topics where you care more about to really express your preference there and less in others. So it's a popular idea. My understanding, though, and I'd be interested in your view on this, is how you resolve the sort of tension between the underlying principle being we elect a representative, that's how democracy functions, versus we choose laws, and that's how democracy functions. Because, the choosing the representative is kind of a different thing, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Imagine running a company that way and saying, well, we've chosen this CEO, director, whatever, but their job is just essentially to be a conduit for, the random aggregation of the thoughts of everybody in the company. I just wonder if there's additional value just having that individual person, with the oversight across many issues. Do you think that's an Achilles heel of the system, or do you think it's maybe a benefit? Have you considered that?
I know that it doesn't fit well. Like the two ideas don't go well together. Like voting for a representative and voting on issues issue by issue. There's a tension between the two things. I'm very interested in the idea of having politicians chosen at random, like a jury system.
Yeah, I was just going to say, does that not solve both issues in many ways? So firstly, you do get representatives chosen, and the representatives choose on their views on certain topics, or because they're randomly drawn, then they're choosing on their personal views, not on whatever's the hot topic in politics and whatever's going to sway the next election, or whatever marginal seat might
Yeah.
have concerns about, car parks at the train station or whatever else is the issue. So the randomized sort of parliament, or the citizens' parliament, solves a problem in terms of, well, you get the representatives making their individual choices, not being conduits for the people, but also because they're randomly selected from the people, they are already by their nature representative of the people's views, because you've randomized and drawn from the community. Does that make sense? Does
Yeah.
would
Yeah, it does.
would you say that sort of almost solves both issues? Because rather than voting on an issue basis, we already have this sample. It's like doing a survey, getting a sample. It would be the same if Flux members were a representative sample of the community and they got in power.
Yeah.
They'd just be funneling the views of those representative members, or we could randomly select people, members from the community, and just make them the MPs,
Yeah,
and then they
I'm
vote directly.
exactly.
So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
am attracted to that because of its simplicity. I think the weakness maybe of the flux system is that it is because it's complex, it's subject to things that we can't foresee, like someone figuring out a clever way to accumulate power in ways that
yeah,
we can't predict now. But people are clever and they can
yeah.
throw spokes in any system.
Yeah, your point there is right. The system would be somewhat complex with accumulating vote credits to vote on different issues. And let's be clear, simple rules on simple systems are really useful. If we just look at um, the preferential voting system that we've had now for many years, I'm pretty sure the federal election is preferential.
Yep, it is. Yep,
You vote in the Senate above the line. I think you have to do a minimum of your top six, ordered
that's
one to
right.
six.
Yep.
Um, and you have to do the whole lower house ballot. You have to number every box. So that seems simple enough, but even then, you still hear a lot of commentary about politics of preference deals and politicians doing preference deals when you literally can't change the voter's vote. Like the voter votes 1 to 8 or whatever it is on the ballot. The party can't make you vote any way. It can give you a flyer at the polling booth and say, please do it this way. So, we changed the voting system years ago, and yet a lot of people still don't understand how a very simple system works, and
Indeed. Yep.
thinks
Yep.
and they think you vote one for your candidate, and that candidate does a secret deal with others where it allocates its voters votes to other people. That doesn't happen anymore, and
Yeah, I
hasn't
think
happened for years, but
I
people still
heard
think it
some,
does, right?
yeah, I heard some
Yeah.
political apparatchiks say that it's like 30, I don't know, 30 or 40%, I think it was, of votes follow exactly the how to vote card of a party, like as though they don't know that they can vote. It doesn't realize they can do whatever they
Yeah.
want. Um,
Yeah. So then I guess my point being, I like the idea of having more say, because the party process itself really limits who can get on the ballot and what issues can get there, right? Because there's this filtering process of getting a party, competing with others, getting members. It's we've just seen the rules changed. If you recall, the minimum number of members you needed to get on the ballot at the federal election.
yeah.
I think it used to be 1,000 or 2,000, then it became 5,000. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but it was a tool to sort of stop this political competition getting on the ballot. So I guess I feel the same way, that there's a lot of political parties where I'm aligned in some things and totally the opposite in others. And it would be great to express my view more on a sort of issue by issue basis. But yeah, I mean, good on Flux for having a go. I'm a big fan of new parties trying new things. And I think, it'd be nice to have a few more organized around this idea of a random selection of people in parliament to sort of overcome a lot of the issues we see. But yeah, I don't think there's one easy or simple answer. We moved to preferential voting, which I think was a big leap forward. And of course, a lot of people still don't understand it. Um, so the next step, I think, is really tricky.
There's a role, I think, for economics in this, which is, I mean, maybe you know a bit about public choice theory, and that sort of it's been, I think, a little bit considered a right wing um, perspective because it often criticizes how bureaucracies and how the public sector functions. Um, are you sort of aware of that body of work, like
Yeah,
Maynard
yeah, I
Olson, the
would say I'm
logic of
a
collective action?
yeah, that's definitely I'm a public choice guy. If you read my PhD thesis, you will see a lot of Olson quotes in it.
Oh yeah. Why are you a public choice guy? Why do you say that? What was your thesis?
So yeah, the thesis was all about back scratching and public choice and how we organize interest groups
Hmm.
through these, as we said at the beginning, through this accumulation of favors and these networks of people who have these built up credits who want to reciprocate with each other. So that
Okay.
I sort of trying to unpick the formation of interest groups, whereas Olson kind of just assumes there is an interest group on this topic, but they ebb
Mm.
and they flow and they reform as things change, and that was sort of where my thesis was about.
So coming back to my dilemma, if we had randomly selected people serving as MPs, how, like, would I still get a say in an issue by itself?
Yeah, well, no, you wouldn't. That's the other risk, I think, is that a lot of people would feel like, well, how do I organize politically in this case? How do I affect change? I don't have a party to appeal to. I don't have members to persuade. It's just random people. So I think, although it seems neat, the risk is people feel disillusioned in a way. They don't believe in the system. And I guess for your specific concern about the lockdowns and there's no candidates to choose, the way you would have to express those views would be to organize, um, in the community so that you could put that issue on the agenda and essentially persuade enough of the community that the random selection of MPs would be persuaded personally. So you'd have a lot of indirect lobbying of putting issues on the table, creating movements so that you would indirectly affect the views of this sample of, the average Aussie. And I suspect though, in your particular case about the lockdowns, a random selection of MPs drawn from the community would have been very pro lockdown because,
Mm. Because I was a
although you and
minority.
I think yeah, you and I thought it was crazy, and a lot of people did. But if you just look at the total population, yeah, I think
Mm.
in Victoria, Dan Andrews is likely to win again. People loved the tough guy stuff, and unfortunately, I think there's really no solution to the majority doing silly things. And I have a lot of fears that with all the political tensions in the world, that we might mass panic into coming up with a good reason to go to war again. And
Yeah.
that's one of the big risks I see. And we can really only do that, I think, with that mass support. And I don't know if these election or voting mechanisms really change that underlying, population-wide political dynamic. It's a good
Yeah.
question to
Very
know if it is
interesting.
possible.
Yeah. It just
Yeah.
seems like such a waste of our technological capabilities that we don't do issue-based voting in some way. Maybe it can be in a non-binding way, but it can become like a convention that, if we do an issue-based vote with our apps, that the decision has some sort of force.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a good point. And publishing that would be a powerful thing itself, right?
yeah,
Just publish and look, sorry to interrupt, but the political parties already do a lot of polling, right? So they're already somewhat um, responding to this in an indirect way as well. So it's also worth noting that they're not on an island with their power. They still are responsive in some ways. But
yeah.
yeah, I think you're right that getting more convention into directly publicizing what people think, promoting some kind of say is very useful.
Yeah, and some of my thinking on this is a little bit inspired by the work of John Keane, who's written some very impressive books recently about this unfinished journey of democracy, and the idea that democracy is a thing that's static, that we have, is false. It's continuously changed, and I think we've fallen into a bit of a period of stagnation where the rules of the game haven't moved, and there's a lot of tension because our technological capabilities are have opened up so many possibilities that they're just not being used, so that the systems we have seem incredibly out of date.
Yeah, I totally think so. And I'm very hopeful to end on a positive with the rise of the minor parties in the recent election. I'm very hopeful that that stagnation you're talking about, the opportunities will be there soon. The masses are shifting in their views. So I think, I like to stay positive. I think there are opportunities coming up for things, either whether it's Flux or other minor parties to experiment with this stuff, but also just shifting the terrain of the major parties as well.
Yeah, I hope so.
I think there's
Yeah.
some positives.
Very good. I've got a great note on which to end. Thank you for this slightly beyond economics chat, and look forward to having more of this in the future.
Good to chat, Jonathan. See you, mate.